Professor Mark Mesina is an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Nutrition, School of Public Health, Loma Linda University, president of Nutrition Matters, Inc., and executive director of the Soy Nutrition Institute. He formerly served as a program director in the Diet and Cancer Branch, National Cancer Institute, and has published more than 75 articles and book chapters for health professionals.
Rates of breast cancer in soy food consuming countries such as China and Japan are about 1/4 those of most Western countries. So it seems counterintuitive that there could be concern about breast cancer patients consuming soy foods. Nevertheless, some animal research published beginning in the late 1990s did show that some components in soybeans stimulated the growth of existing estrogen-sensitive tumors in ovariectomized athymic mice. However, there are a number of problems with this particular animal model, and often animal findings do not do a good job predicting effects in humans, and that appears to be the case with soy. Isoflavones and estrogen differ in many important ways. They differ at the molecular level and at the clinical level. Although isoflavones are classified as phytoestrogens, plant estrogens, they are really more accurately classified as selective estrogen receptor modulators. The tissue specificity of isoflavones is due, at least in part, to the preference of isoflavones to bind to and to activate estrogen receptor beta in comparison with estrogen receptor alpha. In contrast, estrogen binds equally well to estrogen receptor beta and alpha. And this preference of isoflavones for binding to estrogen receptor beta is important because activation of estrogen receptor can lead to very different and sometimes opposite effects of estrogen receptor alpha activation. So at the clinical level, we see very good evidence of the difference between estrogen and isoflavones. So estrogen increases blood clot formation, stimulates vaginal tissue. Isoflavones don't have any of those effects. On the other hand, both molecules, both estrogen and isoflavones, alleviate hot flashes and improve endothelial function. And there's even speculative but very intriguing evidence indicating that, like estrogen, isoflavones improve skin health and can decrease wrinkles in postmenopausal women. Now, so far, no clinical studies have actually looked at the effects of soy foods on breast cancer development or recurrence. But we do have a wealth of clinical data. More than 50 studies have actually looked at the effects of soy or soy isoflavones on breast tissue, markers of breast cancer risk, including breast cell proliferation and breast tissue density. These studies consistently and clearly show that isoflavone exposure, soy food consumption does not adversely affect these markers of breast cancer risk. So soy does not adversely affect breast tissue. In contrast to the lack of effect of isoflavones, hormone therapy, which increases breast cancer risk, increases breast tissue density and increases breast cell proliferation. So we really have quite a bit of clinical evidence in support of the safety of consuming soy foods. Beginning in 2009, we've seen a series of epidemiologic studies published that have addressed the question of the safety and potential benefit of post-diagnosis soy intake on the prognosis of breast cancer patients. In total, more than 11,000 breast cancer patients have been studied. The follow-up period has ranged from 4 to 9 years. Studies have been conducted in the United States as well as in China. These studies not only show that consuming soy foods after a diagnosis of breast cancer is not harmful, they actually indicate that soy food consumption by breast cancer patients reduces tumor recurrence and improves overall survival. In 2012, both the American Cancer Society and the American Institute for Cancer Research issued position statements in which they found and concluded that breast cancer patients can safely consume soy foods. Now, in addition, there are a number of prestigious medical institutions in the United States that have reached similar conclusions, such as researchers from the Mayo Clinic and MD Anderson Cancer Research Center. Both of those groups have concluded that breast cancer patients can safely consume soy foods. A Canadian group of researchers that just published a very extensive systematic review on this issue concluded that soy foods are safe for breast cancer patients. And even Chinese researchers even recently recommended that breast cancer patients consume soy specifically to improve their prognosis. So we're seeing institutions, academic, medical institutions, as well as individual experts concluding that soy foods can be safely consumed by breast cancer patients. Somewhat surprisingly, the epidemiologic data indicate that the consumption of soy food is equally beneficial in ER positive and ER negative breast cancer patients. It also appears to be the case that soy is equally beneficial in pre- and postmenopausal women. So at the moment, we really don't have a basis for differentiating according to estrogen receptor status or menopausal status. So it appears as though soy is beneficial for all groups of breast cancer patients. So one of the really important questions that has been raised in recent years is what impact soy foods have on women when they are actually being treated for breast cancer, either through tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitors. Until recently, we really didn't have any good evidence to provide a thoughtful answer. But recently, epidemiologic studies have found, very surprisingly I might say, that it appears as though soy food consumption actually enhances the efficacy of both tamoxifen and aromatase inhibitors. As a result, I think it's perfectly fine for breast cancer patients while they're on treatment to be consuming soy foods. No food should play too large of a role in the diet. Variation and moderation are important dietetic principles. So I recommend that both breast cancer patients and healthy women consume anywhere from 2 to 4 servings of soy foods per day. That still represents a modest amount of soy, and it's the amount of soy consumed in Japan and in Chinese cities such as Shanghai. For most Westerners who are not used to consuming soy, I think a good initial target is 2 servings per day. No more than 4, simply because we don't want to place too much emphasis on any single food. There are 2 primary types of traditional Asian soy foods: the fermented foods, which include miso, natto, and tempeh, and then the unfermented foods, such as tofu, soy milk, and edamame, or the green soybeans. I think it's important to focus on the whole soy foods in particular, more so than the processed soy foods. Just like nutritionists would recommend an apple over apple juice, you want to consume as much as possible the food in its original or natural state. So I think it's important to emphasize whole soy foods. That's soy milk made from the whole soybean, green soybeans, edamame. Tofu is minimally processed. So stick to the whole soy food. Some processed soy foods are fine to incorporate in the diet, but the emphasis should be on whole soy foods, just like whole plant foods should be the emphasis of the diet overall. In addition to the possibility that soy foods may actually improve the prognosis of breast cancer patients, soy foods provide really high quality protein. They're one of the few good plant sources of both essential fatty acids, the omega-6 polyunsaturated fat linoleic acid, and the omega-3 polyunsaturated fat linolenic acid. In addition, there's some really striking evidence indicating that modest consumption of soy foods, that is a couple of servings per day, can substantially reduce risk of both stroke and heart disease. We have both clinical trial data and observational studies, prospective cohort studies, indicating that soy consumption reduces risk of stroke and coronary heart disease. So there are really lots of reasons for breast cancer patients to consume soy. We really need to generate more data, gain a better understanding on the impact of overall diet on the survival of breast cancer patients. But certainly the evidence is pointing towards the benefits of consuming a plant-based diet for all cancer patients. That's the diet that's most helpful for cancer patients as well as people without cancer. So it's important to consume beans and whole grains, lots of fruits and vegetables, and seeds and nuts are also an important component of the diet, along as exercise is important, and just maintaining an overall healthy weight. So certainly when you think about consuming a plant-based diet, soy foods can be part of that diet.